There's a 1-0. That is a rocket to left, and the lead is cut in half. Rendon makes it 2-1.
The Willie Mays Most Valuable Player Award goes to Stephen Strasburg of the Washington Nationals.
Talking baseball here on Stadium. I'm Dave Ross, joined by our GM, our manager, and our players, Steve Phillips, John Farrell, Trevor Plouffe. And gentlemen, to the victor goes the spoils. Congratulations, Washington Nationals. You are the World Series champions, and now the offseason already begins. Stephen Strasburg opts out of his contract, so he's a free agent. Anthony Rendon is a free agent. I'm going to start with the GM here. Steve, if you can only get one of those two back in D.C., which one do you earmark?
Okay, so I would bring back Anthony Rendon, and here's why. Because if I'm going to spend $30+ million a year on bringing a player back in, I want predictability. And that's what Anthony Rendon brings. He's the most predictable player on their team with his performance offensively and defensively, his approach day in and day out. You know what you're going to get when he shows up and gets it done. On the other side for Stephen Strasburg, my biggest concern, and look, I love his stuff. He showed such great stuff and tenacity and maturity and leadership and all of that. But health is a concern. He's made 30 starts in a season only once in the last 5 years. This year, over the last 5 years, he averaged 26 starts. I can't pay him $30 million with the potential that he's going to suffer injuries again because he does have flawed mechanics with that delivery. So it's not that I don't like Stephen Strasburg, but I'm not going to invest that $30 million unless I'm going to get predictability back, and Rendon gives me the predictability.
John, as the skipper here, what would you say to management as to which guy to you as the manager is more important to the clubhouse?
Even as a former pitcher, I would say you've got to go with a position player. He's now 5 years past Tommy John, which the second time you're looking at it, you've got a shelf life of about 10 years. So in this case, getting the bang for your buck and the everyday production from an everyday player, I would make that move probably 8 out of 10 times going to the position player.
Trevor, are you going to be the contrarian here? Or are you going to go with the guy that does play every day in Anthony Rendon over the guy that pitches every 5 days?
I don't think there's any surprise as to what I'm going to say. I'm going to have to go with, I want to keep both. I mean, look, you already gave Strasburg $100 million over the 4 years, and supposedly they offered Rendon around $210 million over 6 years. So they've already said, okay, we're willing to spend $310 million, $320 million over those 6 years. Now, obviously, they're going to need a little bump up from that. To get Rendon to where Arenado was, they're going to have to go a little bit higher. To keep Strasburg, they're going to have to get a little bit higher. But say it's $150 million over 6 years. That's just $25 million a year. They can find that in their budget, especially after winning the World Series. They're a big market team. If I'm on that team, say I'm Trey Turner, I'm talking to management, I'm talking to the front office, I'm saying, please, let's keep both these guys. Let's try to run it back again next year because it's a lot of fun what they just did.
It sounds like, Trevor, you might make a good agent one day because you got all those numbers figured out. We know that Scott Boras is the super agent for both of these guys, Anthony Rendon and Stephen Strasburg, as well as other major clients out there to be like a Garrett Cole. Trevor, I'll start off with you again as the player. You guys talk amongst yourselves here. We all know that Scott Boras is the big fish when it comes to the agencies here. Is this good for baseball that one guy theoretically seems like he controls the top-end talent in the game?
Well, if you would ask me this question a couple of years ago, I'd have said, sure, he's great for baseball. You know, he drives players' contracts up. You know, free agents, as a player, you want each free agent to get as much money as possible because that just drives it up for every other player. So a couple of years ago, I would have said yes. Now we're hearing reports that very few GMs want to work with him. And I've had some inside info about kind of the way he's been operating with these GMs. And, you know, I can understand why they don't want to work with him. So he does have a lot of power. He does have all the best players. So it kind of puts these organizations in a bind here. But things have changed in the last couple of years, the way that they've interacted with him. And now I'm just not so sure on my answer. I still say, yes, he's good for baseball, but I think he's going to have to be a little bit more creative in the way that he approaches contracts for his players.
Very interesting answer. And John and Steve, I know you guys have direct correlations, obviously, with Scott and different perspectives here. John, I'll start off with you as the manager. How do you deal with a super agent like this when you know he's going to have some of your guys that are in your locker room, in your clubhouse here, that you have to deal with on a day in, day out?
Well, there's no question that a agent has got a major role in a player's life, and I think that the key is to have some understanding when it comes to off-season workouts, when it comes to playing time, when it comes to workloads. They're kind of the watchdog for their players to not risk injury. So in some ways, you've got to engage them. You've got to embrace what their message is and try to thread that needle and create a little bit of a balance. That's not just with Scott Boras. That's with other major agents that are out there. But the one thing that I find that the game is changing. Scott used to keep his players out till January and February to get a big deal. I think the way the free agent market has worked the last 3 to 4 years, that delay and that holding out has really lost its impact. And you see him kind of conforming with some of the signings as other agents have gone. So I think the big fish in Scott Boras' case, yes, he's always going to have the great players, but I think that controlling the market has become less and less.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Stephen. Obviously, there's history in D.C. with Stephen Strasburg and Scott Boras. You go back to 2012 and the Strasburg shutdown, of course, and then see how it plays out here 6-7 years later. How did you deal with Scott, and how do GMs in general have to deal with the ultimate power broker in a guy like Scott Boras?
Look, first of all, it's always good to have a villain, right? And Scott's willing to play the role. And so you sort of, in the byplay of competition, the Yankees sort of play the villain sometimes in Major League Baseball. And for Scott Boras in the offseason, he plays that role, and he plays it really well. And he represents his players. He's very prepared. He comes in and he can sell his guys to the point that you can almost set the phone down for 20 minutes, let him sort of rattle, work around, clean up your office a little bit, come back, pick it up, and he's still going, selling his guy. But he does a great job of doing that. He does somewhat control the timing, especially if he has plan A players. So Rendon and Strasburg and Garrett Cole are all plan A for teams. And so if he slow plays it, he's going to slow play the entire market. And what he can't do is complain how slow things are moving when he's the one sort of controlling that. As John said, maybe there's some conformity starting to happen. I think he's misread the market a little bit over the last couple of years, not understanding analytics and how teams are analyzing players. But with Scott, the way I've always approached it is I don't chase what he believes the market is. Like, he wants to set the market and have everybody come up to him. And I don't think you can GM that way. I think what you have to do is determine where's the value for you as an organization for his player and negotiate to that number, but don't chase any other number. And if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work. And if somebody else goes to where he believes the value is, then so be it. But I think you can't play the game of chase, where he's got this mystery team in and these teams are in and this is where the number is. I think you say, be disciplined. This is how I see the player. This is where the value is, and this is where I'm willing to go to get the guy. Otherwise, you're sort of, stabbing in the dark as to where you're going to go to try to sign this player.
It is fascinating discussion, gentlemen. We know the games have ended for 2019, but I feel like the games are just beginning with the super agent and the players and the free agents to be in Major League Baseball. Steve Phillips, John Farrell, Trevor Plouffe, always a pleasure talking baseball right here on Stadium.